She stood there in white silk, 20 feet from forever. The organ hummed. 200 faces turned toward her like sunflowers tracking light. Her father's arm trembled beneath her hand. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the corset boning and the perfume and the practiced smile, something whispered a single word that would shatter everything. No. What happened next wasn't in anyone's wedding planning binder. It wasn't the fairy tale ending her mother had orchestrated since she was 6 years old. It wasn't the happily ever after that justified the $40,000 reception or the calligrapher-addressed invitations or the three-tiered fondant tower waiting in the country club ballroom. But it was real. Searingly, devastatingly, beautifully real. And if you've ever felt the weight of everyone else's expectations crushing the person you're supposed to be, you need to hear this story. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint every single person who loves you. Hit that like button if you've ever chosen yourself when the whole world wanted you to choose differently, and subscribe because we're diving deep into stories that remind us why being human is so achingly complicated and so worth it. Her name was Maren, though that detail feels almost too small for what she carried. 28 years old. Marketing director at a firm that sold things nobody needed to people who couldn't afford them. Engaged to Connor for 2 years, dating for 4 before that. He was good on paper in that dangerous way that makes you ignore the static in your chest. Steady job. Close with his family. Remembered birthdays. The kind of man your grandmother calls a catch while something inside you slowly drowns. They met the way people meet when they're not really paying attention to their lives. A friend's barbecue. Too much sangria. A conversation about nothing that somehow lasted until the tiki torches burned out and the mosquitoes claimed the backyard. He made her laugh that night, and laughter felt like enough when you're 22 and convinced that love is something that happens to you rather than something you choose with your whole chest every single day. The proposal came on a beach at sunset because Connor had watched enough romantic comedies to know the aesthetic requirements of forever. Maren said yes before the question finished leaving his mouth. Not because her body flooded with certainty, but because saying no felt impossible when a man is kneeling in sand and a dozen strangers are already pulling out their phones to film your happiness for their Instagram stories. You don't ruin that moment. You don't make it awkward. You smile. You cry the expected tears. You let him slide the ring on your finger and you post the photo with the caption everyone expects and you ignore the small voice asking why your first thought was what will people think if I say no instead of I cannot wait to spend my life with this person. The engagement was long because Maren kept finding reasons to wait. The right venue. The right season. The right budget. The right alignment of stars and schedules and her mother's availability to fly in from Phoenix for cake tastings. But really she was waiting for the feeling to arrive. The certainty. The bone-deep knowing that this was her person, her path, her future unfolding exactly as it should. She kept thinking it would come during the dress fittings or the menu selection or the moment she addressed the first invitation in her careful handwriting. It never came. Instead there was just this low-grade hum of wrongness, like a fluorescent light flickering in a room you can't leave. Connor never sensed it. Or maybe he did and chose not to see, which is its own kind of tragedy. He was happy in that uncomplicated way that made Maren feel like a monster for her complications. He talked about house hunting and baby names and the kind of SUV they'd need when they started a family. He used we like it was the most natural pronoun in the world while Maren still thought of herself as I even when standing next to him. She tried to match his enthusiasm. Tried to want what he wanted. Tried to perform the role of excited bride with enough conviction that the feeling would follow the action. It didn't. 3 weeks before the wedding, Maren had the dream. Not a nightmare in the traditional sense. No monsters or falling or showing up naked to the ceremony. Just her, walking down a long road that stretched beyond the horizon, wearing hiking boots instead of heels, carrying a backpack instead of a bouquet. The sky was enormous. The air tasted like freedom. She was alone and she was smiling, and when she woke up, tears were already streaming down her face because she knew. She finally knew. She didn't tell anyone. Not Connor. Not her mother who had already bought 3 different outfits for the rehearsal dinner. Not her sister who was flying in from Seattle. Not her best friend who had spent $200 on a bridesmaid dress the color of dusty rose that she would never wear again. Maren carried the knowing like a stone in her stomach. Heavy. Undeniable. Impossible to ignore no matter how many times she tried to swallow it down. The night before the wedding, there was no cold feet conversation. No dramatic confession. Connor fell asleep easily while Maren lay beside him, watching the ceiling fan rotate in the dark, counting down the hours until she would have to decide whether to honor the truth inside her or honor every single person who had invested in her happiness. Around 3 in the morning, she got up and walked to the window. Outside, the city was mostly dark, just the occasional headlight cutting through the stillness. She thought about all the other sleepless people out there. All the ones trapped in lives that looked right from the outside but felt like slow suffocation from the inside. She wondered how many of them went through with it anyway. How many walked down aisles and signed mortgages and had children they weren't sure they wanted because disappointing people felt worse than disappointing yourself. She decided she wouldn't be one of them. But deciding and doing are galaxies apart. The morning arrived with its choreographed chaos. Hair and makeup artists transforming the bridal suite into a backstage production. Champagne and croissants nobody ate because everyone was too nervous or too excited or too focused on getting the lighting right for photos. Maren moved through it like someone watching themselves in a movie. Stepping into the dress. Sitting still while her mother fastened the 47 pearl buttons running down her spine. Smiling when the photographer asked her to hold the bouquet and look wistful toward the window. Her mother kissed her forehead and told her she'd never looked more beautiful. And Maren thought about how beauty has nothing to do with rightness. How you can look perfect and feel completely wrong. How the most gorgeous prisons are still prisons. The church was everything it was supposed to be. Candles and roses and that specific quality of light that filters through stained glass and makes everything look holy. Connor stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored suit, hands clasped, smiling that smile that had first made her laugh 6 years ago. The groomsmen stood in a row like props in a play about happiness. The string quartet played something classical and emotionally manipulative. And Maren stood at the back of the church with her father, his arm crooked for her to take, his eyes already wet because he'd been practicing this moment since she was born. The doors opened. The music swelled. 200 people rose to their feet. And Maren couldn't move. Her father whispered, "Ready, sweetheart?" And the question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin already pulled. She looked down that aisle. It wasn't long, maybe 50 feet, but it looked like miles. It looked like the rest of her life compressed into a carpeted runway lined with people who loved the version of her that made sense to them. At the end stood Connor, good and kind and completely wrong. And she could do it. She could walk that distance and say the words and sign the paper and wear the ring and build the life everyone expected. She could choose that smallness. That safety. That slow erasure of the person she actually was beneath the person everyone wanted her to be. Or she could choose the road from her dream. The one with no end point. The one that scared her precisely because it was hers alone. "I can't," she said. Barely a whisper. Her father didn't hear it over the music. "I can't," she said again, louder this time. Her father's face crumpled in slow motion. "Honey, it's just nerves. Everyone gets nervous." "It's not nerves, Dad. I can't marry him. I don't want this." The words felt like stones leaving her mouth. Heavy and true and irrevocable. The guests in the back rows were starting to notice that something was wrong. The music continued, oblivious. At the altar, Connor's smile was beginning to falter into confusion. Maren's mother appeared from somewhere, her face a mask of controlled panic, already trying to usher Maren into a side room, already strategizing how to salvage this, already thinking about what to tell people. But Maren didn't go. She stepped away from her father, into the center of the aisle, and she looked at Connor. Really looked at him for maybe the first time in months. He wasn't a villain. He was just a person who wanted a life she couldn't give him. And she was just a person who had spent too long trying to fold herself into a shape that would fit his blueprints. "I'm sorry," she said. Loud enough for the first 10 rows to hear. "I can't do this. I'm so sorry." Then she turned. Still in her dress. Still holding the bouquet. And she walked back down the aisle she'd been about to walk up. Past her grandmother clutching her pearls. Past Connor's mother already crying. Past bridesmaids frozen in their dusty rose gowns like confused monuments. Past everyone she was letting down. Past every expectation she was shattering. Past the life she was supposed to want. Out the church doors. Into the parking lot. Into the ridiculous white limousine that was supposed to take them to the reception. The driver stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "The airport," she said. "Now." She bought a ticket to Iceland with the credit card they'd opened for wedding expenses. Changed in the airport bathroom, stuffing the wedding dress into a trash can because she couldn't think of anything else to do with it. Boarded the plane in yoga pants and a hoodie bought from a gift shop. Sat in a window seat while her phone vibrated with incoming calls and texts she couldn't bear to read. Watched the city get smaller and smaller until it was just lights in the dark, and then nothing at all. Connor deserved better than her silence, but she didn't have words yet. Only this animal need to move. To go. To outrun the shame and the guilt and the horrible certainty that she had just ruined everything for everyone, including herself. She didn't feel brave. She felt monstrous. But she also felt awake for the first time in years. Iceland was accidental. She stayed for 3 weeks, hiking trails she had no business hiking, sleeping in hostels, talking to strangers who didn't know her story and therefore couldn't judge it. The landscape matched her internal state, all volcanic and raw, beautiful in a way that made no apologies. She cried on mountaintops and in rental cars and once in a grocery store while trying to figure out Icelandic yogurt labels. She let herself fall apart without an audience. Without having to explain or defend or justify. The grief was enormous, not for Connor, but for the easier life she'd rejected. The one where you don't have to explain yourself because you're doing what everyone already understands. But underneath the grief was something else. Something she'd forgotten existed. Space. Room to breathe. Permission to not know what came next. She'd spent so long following the script that she'd forgotten she could improvise. That life wasn't something you figured out and then executed. It was something you discovered by paying attention to the quiet voice inside that knows things your logical brain will never understand. From Iceland she went to Portugal. Then Morocco. Then a small town in southern Spain where she stayed for 2 months, living in an apartment above a bakery, learning Spanish from a 70-year-old woman named Carmen who thought the wedding story was the most romantic thing she'd ever heard. "You chose yourself," Carmen said in halting English. "That is the only love story that matters." Maren started writing. Not for publication. Just for herself. Trying to understand what had happened and why. The words came in torrents, all the things she'd never said out loud. How she'd confused compatibility with love. How she'd let other people's comfort dictate her choices. How she'd been so afraid of being selfish that she'd become selfless in a way that erased her entirely. The writing was messy and raw and probably terrible, but it was hers. Undeniably, completely hers. 8 months after leaving Connor at the altar, she came home. Not to the life she'd left, but to a new apartment in a different city. To a job that paid less but made her feel alive. To friendships she'd neglected and had to rebuild. To family dinners that were stilted at first but gradually thawed into something real. Her mother still didn't fully understand, but she was trying. Her father had cried on the phone and told her he was proud of her, which made her cry harder than anything else. Connor got married 2 years later to someone who wanted exactly what he wanted. Maren sent him a message saying she was happy for him, and she meant it. There was no bitterness. Just relief that they'd both found their ways to different versions of happiness. People still ask Maren if she regrets it. The honest answer is complicated. She regrets the pain she caused. The money people lost. The humiliation Connor endured. The way she handled it, running instead of having the hard conversation weeks earlier when she first knew the truth. But walking away from a life that would have slowly killed the most essential parts of her? That she doesn't regret. Not even a little. She's 33 now. Still unmarried. Still figuring it out. Dating sometimes, but not desperately. Not from a place of needing someone to complete her. She's learning what she actually wants instead of what she thinks she should want. It's slower this way. Messier. There's no clear map from here to happily ever after. But there's oxygen. There's honesty. There's a version of herself she can look at in the mirror without flinching. The dress is still in that airport trash can, probably. Or maybe someone found it and donated it to a thrift store where another bride bought it for $50 and wore it to a wedding that actually happened. Maren likes to imagine it found someone who wanted it more than she did. Someone for whom that dress meant beginning instead of ending. Because that's what the altar was for her. Not an ending of one thing, but a doorway to everything else. To the roads that only appear when you're brave enough to step off the path everyone else is walking. To the life that's actually yours instead of the one that looks good on paper. To the terrifying, exhilarating, heartbreaking, absolutely necessary act of choosing yourself when every single external force is pushing you toward choosing anything else. She's hiking again. Real hiking, the kind where you carry everything you need on your back and trust your legs to get you where you're going. Last month she did a solo trek through Patagonia. No plan. No timeline. Just her and the mountains and the wind that sounds like the world breathing. She sent a photo to her sister from a campsite at sunset, the sky impossibly orange, her face dirty and smiling. Her sister texted back 3 words, "You look free." And she is. Free from the story everyone else wrote for her. Free from the tyranny of should and supposed to. Free from performing happiness she didn't feel. It's not always comfortable, this freedom. Some days she still wakes up uncertain about everything except the certainty that she can't go back to sleepwalking through a life that wasn't hers. But she'd rather be uncomfortable and awake than comfortable and slowly disappearing. The truth is, Maren didn't leave Connor at the altar. She left herself there. The version who believed that being good meant being compliant. Who thought love was something you earned through self-erasure. Who was so terrified of disappointing others that she was willing to disappoint the one person she'd have to live with forever. That woman got left at the altar. And the woman who walked out of that church, terrified and certain and completely alone, was someone new. Someone old. Someone true. Not everyone will understand this story. Some people will always think she was selfish, cruel, dramatic. That she should have figured it out sooner. That she owed Connor more than shock and public humiliation. They're not entirely wrong. But they're not entirely right either. Because sometimes the mess is the only honest path available. Sometimes you don't figure it out until you're standing at the threshold with 200 witnesses and your whole scripted future waiting. Sometimes the best decision you ever make looks like the worst one from every outside angle. Maren knows this now. Knows that you can't betray yourself into happiness. That settling is its own kind of violence. That the people who truly love you will eventually understand, even if it takes years. And that the scariest door is often the one you need to walk through most. The wedding that never happened cost $40,000 and countless relationships and 2 years of therapy to process. But it gave her something infinitely more valuable than a marriage certificate. It gave her back to herself. Messy and uncertain and gloriously, terrifyingly free. And if you asked her now, 5 years later, whether she'd do it again, knowing everything she knows about the aftermath, the answer comes without hesitation. Yes. Every time. Forever. Yes. Because some decisions aren't about logic or kindness or doing the right thing by everyone else's standards. Some decisions are about survival. About honoring the part of you that knows things before your brain can explain them. About trusting that the voice saying no when everyone else is saying yes might be the only voice worth listening to. That altar wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of everything that mattered. The first step on the road that only she could walk. And she's still walking it now, one uncertain step at a time, toward a destination she can't see but somehow recognizes as home.